Well, awesome. Everyone, I am so excited for you to be here today with us on Roundy's Rants, Raves, and Reviews. I have got Dr. Trina Boice with me, who has got an incredible book that's come out, coming out,
It just came out.
just came out, and she's done lots of other work, and we've just spent 20 minutes ranting together and getting to know each other even better. And we're like twinners, and we're so excited.
Yes.
And I am excited to share her with you and her work. So, Trina, Dr. Boyce, Trina, how do you want me to address you?
Trina.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, so I'm Trina.
Trina.
Yeah. So I am a professor at BYU Idaho online and teach a bunch of different classes there. And I also teach at another college in Tennessee online, which is kind of random. And I taught for probably 15 years in higher education, just in a variety of subjects. I have a didactic personality. Anytime I learn anything, I immediately want to teach somebody, right? Which is why I'm on this podcast, because I've been studying Judaism and a little bit of Hebrew over the years. And it's just so fun to learn all this stuff. And then I have to tell somebody about it. But so I'm an author of 35 books. So my 35th one just came out this last month, and also an author coach. And it's really fun to work with different authors, fiction and nonfiction, and see the different mindsets because they're different brains. And I just am so fascinated by that. And let's see, I'm a film critic. I'm obsessed with movies. So I may randomly throw out some movie line because words are important. We were just talking before we started filming. Yeah, words are important and words are fun and language is amazing. And I love studying cultures. And one of my bachelor's degrees is in international relations. I had gone with the BYU study abroad program, and for the first time went to Europe, and just my mind just exploded. I'm like, there's a whole world out there. And I wanted to see all of it. And so I love to travel. And I was going to lead a tour group to Israel just a couple of months ago. What's happening in Israel, it's been a little crazy, a little scary. And so sadly, one by one, the guests started canceling, understandably.
Yeah.
And I was so disappointed because I can't wait to go back again. But yeah, it's just a little dangerous over there. And so, I said safety first. We're going to
Absolutely.
not go, and hopefully it'll clear up. There are pockets of time. Way back when I was an undergrad at BYU, I tried to go to BYU study abroad back then with my twin sister, and it was canceled because there was threats of terrorism. So we tried again the next year, and they canceled it again because of threats of terrorism. And there were always threats of
I was going
terrorism.
to say it's Middle East. It's threats of terrorism.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
then when I went with my husband,
hmm
there were things happening on Temple Mount, shootings that were happening the day before we were supposed to leave. And I'm like, oh no, should we go? And people said, no, it's always like that, which is true. And my husband was actually kind of disappointed when we did go. He's like, I was kind of hoping to see that Iron Dome in action.
Like
I'm
I
like,
wanted to see this happen.
yeah, we can watch it safely from TV. But yeah, have you been to Israel?
I would love to. My parents went a few years ago and
Oh,
absolutely loved it. They went with my sister and my brother-in-law, and they got to go everywhere and everything. And in fact, my mom got lost once. My dad was like, "Where did my wife go?" And he freaked out. It was a great story, but they absolutely loved it. They went with a couple of BYU professors or something, and they read the books beforehand, and just an incredible experience. And I love hearing my dad talk about it. And so one of these days, when we can afford it and it's not too dangerous to go, my
right.
husband and I want to do a lot of traveling and stuff, but that is not afforded us yet. The first time I actually am going to be leaving the United States is actually in a couple of months. I'm going to go to Japan and see my son, who's been stationed there. And so that'll be my first time leaving the United States.
Really?
Yeah. I get to travel through
Japan.
books and study right now, but one of these days I'll get to go. So yeah.
Well, but Japan is lovely.
Oh.
The
Yeah.
country itself is just beautiful,
Mhm.
but the people are truly special. Here's how I summarize our experience in Japan. We took our family a number of years ago, and then my kids have been back because we all fell in love with it so much. We went and did all the touristy things, had a great time, ate amazing food, the whole thing. But we're on the airplane, on the tarmac, getting ready to leave the country. And I noticed something kind of going out on down on the tarmac below where I was sitting. And I looked out the window and, a bunch of the workers, the grounds crew and the whatever you call them, the people that were down outside the plane, they were waving. And I was like, are they waving at us like goodbye? Or are they trying to get the pilot's attention? What's
What's
going
going
on?
on?
It wasn't super clear. And so I said to my husband, who was sitting next to me, I'm like, look, what is that? And then all of a sudden, in unison, they bowed to all
Oh
of
my
us on the
goodness.
plane as if to say, thank you for coming to our country and gracing us with your presence. I'm like, who does that? That's
That is definitely not a United
amazing.
States thing. No.
So humble, so helpful. Yeah, just so gracious. Man, what a beautiful people. And I've spent a lot of time in China. Went back and forth many times for business, and I'm obsessed with China. However, China is also a very controversial country, and they hate Japan. The
Yeah.
young people would just view or spew. What is the cliche I'm trying to say? Anyway, they would say terrible things about Japan, and rightly so. Japan was terrible to China.
They have a long history of that.
They,
Yeah.
yeah, and I just was so surprised that the young ones were so,
They're taught that.
yeah, that they were so angry, and they didn't even live through some of that went down. But you're gonna have an amazing time.
I can't wait. I love that's one thing that say like I love learning about the cultures. Reading and teaching English to me isn't just a book. It's what's around it. What's the history? What's the
Yeah,
people like? I very much humanities approach to things where you can't separate them, right? And they all go together and the impact because and how that all affects us and why they chose certain words and what those words meant in that time also mattered so much because what we think of words now and what they were then is so different and how that impacts things. And
did you
just
ever
so
what? Here's my movie
yeah.
reference. Have you ever seen the movie Arrival
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes,
with
yes, yes.
Amy?
Uh-huh.
What's her name?
Yeah.
Anyway, the
Yeah.
one with the alien.
Yeah. Yes. And
So
trying to
I'll
teach each
bet
other the
you,
language. Yeah.
yes, I thought that movie was so fascinating because it illustrated how language affects how you think, what the critical thinking skills are, what the process is on how you analyze and think. And I find that so true with all the languages that, I've tried to learn over the years. And you will probably we are such kindred spirits because we both love language and we both have taught English. And there's this one scene where Amy is a teacher and she starts this lecture and is comparing Spanish to Portuguese. And then, of course, the lecture gets cut short because aliens are arriving,
I think it's a
And I'm
yeah.
like, I wanted to hear the rest of her lecture.
I want to know what happened. Why does those words matter?
I know. I think that's so funny.
Well, and that's a funny thing because in sign language, which is the language that I do know the most and fairly fluent in,
Oh,
is that it is so nuanced and one word, one sign means so many different things. How you do it, your body language, your facial expressions. But as a theater teacher, it's the same thing too, right? How we say a word changes its meaning, even if it is the same word, let alone if you choose the different word
right.
and things like this. And how we interact with each other and how we understand each other and the perception of ourselves and our world are so based on those things. And people have forgotten that. And I think I don't, we were talking too about students and they can't even write basic sentences, let alone understand how words are so, and they just throw out words and they don't understand what they're doing half the time with their words.
Right. Well, and even the intonation, like I could say right, or I could go right.
Yeah, I'm
Because you
fine.
teach theater.
Fine.
Yeah. Well, and so we're talking about language because I wanted to talk about
Yes.
these two books, but they're kind of connected because they were based on my first trip to Israel. The most recent book that you were just asking me about is called The Language of Heaven. Can you see that, or is it backwards?
It's perfect, actually. It looks great. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so I've been studying Judaism and a little bit of Judaism for years, especially as I taught gospel doctrine at church and was so fascinated with the Old Testament. We just moved from Las Vegas to Utah. And I just got my first calling in this new ward, and I'm going to teach gospel doctrine again
In
in
2026 with your book. Yay!
Yeah, it's Old Testament, and the Old Testament is so rich in Judaism and Hebrew. And I just thought this would be such a great supplement to help you dive deeper into the Old Testament, right? I mean, we were talking about words. What is one of the names for Jesus? The Word.
Exactly.
Jesus is all over the Old Testament. And I think a lot of times Christians really love the New Testament. I mean, who doesn't? It's all about Jesus. And we
Absolutely.
struggle with the Old Testament because there's weird stories and stuff and seems unrelated. And even the God of the Old Testament seems mean and vengeful and angry at the people all the time, you know? And Jesus is all over the Old Testament. And it's
Yes.
like, you know, a scavenger hunt to look for all of the layers, the symbolism that's in the Old
Yes.
Testament. You know, God tried to teach so many symbols that are types of Christ or symbols of Christ so that when he did come, the Jews would recognize him as the Messiah. And of course, many did, many followed him. I just banged my microphone with my
You're
hand,
good.
getting so excited.
We talk with our hands too, right? We're just, yep. I'm sitting on my hands right now. I'm so excited.
We're the same person. Anyway, and so this particular book, I wanted to have a Hebrew word for every week of the year, but it actually has more. I think there's like 60 chapters. So you can study one word, and each chapter has how to pronounce the word. And in Hebrew, you read from right to left. And so how to pronounce it, how to kind of read it, the meaning, the scriptures where we find those, not all of the scriptures, because some of them are many, some of the major ones
At least the major ones, yeah.
that show how this word was used. Then a story that perfectly illustrates the multiple meanings of that word. And then a little Jewish fun fact, which is my favorite part, so that you really understand how they embrace that concept, you know, or the concepts, plural, of those words. And some quotes, and then how it relates to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, even how it connects with our doctrine. And we see it echoed even in the Book of Mormon. Now, while the Book of Mormon was not written in Hebrew, it starts off with Lehi and his family, and they came from Jerusalem, right?
Right. They would have been
And
speaking Hebrew. Yeah.
right. Yes. And so we see some of those threads throughout the Book of Mormon, especially early on because of the early writers, you know, or Lehi and all of that. Anyway, I just find that kind of stuff fascinating. There's a word, I'm going to have to get my old lady glasses on to read my notes. There's this word, you're going to love this because we think so much alike. It's called Haggah in Hebrew. And it means to read, to study, to meditate, specifically the scriptures. Reading and studying the Torah is the most important thing that Jewish people can do, right? And they take it very seriously. But there are added elements to the word. It's not just reading and studying, but it's similar to in the Book of Mormon, where we are counseled to feast upon the scriptures. And what is so cool about Haggah, this Hebrew word, is it actually has the connotation of tasting the scriptures. And I'm like, oh, because you want to ingest them, right? And so you've probably seen images of the Jews at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And that it's also called the Wailing Wall. Although I didn't see anybody wailing when I was there, but you know, but you do hear them talking and murmuring, because that's also the verbal ingesting of the scriptures is embedded in that Hebrew word. They're tasting, they're ingesting, and then they also rock. Have you seen videos? You know what I'm talking
Hmm.
about? They'll stand at the wall and they'll be holding the Torah. And the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Right.
And we call it the Pentateuch as well. And then they obviously study the rest of the Old Testament, and then they even study a third book called the Talmud, where rabbis debate and try to analyze the scriptures and what does it really mean. And,
But it's
and
the
so they
critiques.
study
Yeah.
all of that. But mostly at the wall, you'll see them with the Torah.
So we're,
And they're holding it in their hands, and you can hear them talking or murmuring, and they're rocking. I mean, their full body is engaged in studying and learning and understanding the scriptures. And I think that is so cool. And especially the tasting of the scriptures,
hmm
how do they taste to you? How would you answer
hmm
that question?
Wow. That's it. That's such an important thing. I was just actually thinking of another movie reference when you said that, of Fiddler on the Roof, where if he was a rich man, what would he do? He would sit and study the Torah all day, right?
Right.
And that's what he does. And how much we don't even take even 5, 10 minutes of what time we have today, but to be able to spend just all day long, every day, to be able to feast upon those words. It's not even just feasting, because when we feast and we eat, it becomes integrated as part of us. It becomes as a part of who we are physically and spiritually and mentally, to become one with us, that word. And so all of that together is just, yeah, my mind is like rocking right now with things. And so that's such a beautiful word, Haggah. Is that,
Haggah.
I'm saying it correctly? Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah. And it incorporates all of those things
Yeah.
that we just said: reading, studying, pondering, meditating, murmuring, tasting. I love
Yeah.
that. And let me share an experience that I had that
Mhm.
I will never forget. And I have a hard time often sharing it because I was so speechless and so filled with emotion when I experienced this. So at the wall, there's a, and this is outdoors, by the way. So in
Mhm.
case your listeners or your watchers on YouTube haven't seen this before, Google it and look at some of the images. So it's this massive stone wall, and they believe that it is the last remaining wall of the second temple. So it is sacred, the most sacred spot that the Jews have. And Jerusalem is the most valuable piece of real estate in the world, because right above that wall is the Temple Mount, and there are 2 of the most sacred spots for Islam. So Muslims go and they have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, kind of right above that wall up on the platform, and then the Dome of the Rock, which you've probably seen before. Everybody, that's a big famous landmark of Jerusalem. And it's very touching because on Friday, if you get to go, when you get to go someday, try to go on a Friday, because that's the really special day of the week, Shabbat for Jews.
Yes.
But in the morning, the Muslims all flood into the old city of Jerusalem, which is within the walls, the
Mhm.
gated walls. And then outside the walls is still a huge growing city of Jerusalem. But so the Muslims pour into the city and they worship, and then they leave so that the Jews could then come in and begin their Sabbath service, their Shabbat, which begins Friday at dusk. And so when I was there, we got to experience all of that. It was just amazing. And so the Jews were kind of trickling in, early afternoon. And so we had some time at the wall, because sometimes it is just packed full of people. So there were people there for sure, but there is kind of a curtained wall divider that separates the men from the women.
Right.
And if you are a member, those of you listening or watching, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, think about what you know if you've been endowed in the temple and what
Temple.
you've experienced, because there are so many similarities.
Mhm.
So the men will go on their side. And what's really sweet is they have little tables set out on both sides for men and women with scripture, so they can pick up the Torah or, whatever they want to study. So they have copies, and they even have little yarmulkes if you don't have one or you forgot one or you want one, and you can wear that. And so I have a picture of my husband and my brother-in-law, and they're
Oh.
standing there with wearing their little
Yarmulkes on.
yarmulkes, and all the Jews are wearing whatever their garb is, depending on what type of Jew they are. And I love all of the outfits. I call them outfits, but their worshiping clothing and their hats and the whole deal. It's so cool. And they're up at the wall and they're worshiping. And they even have this side room where you can go in and they have scriptures laid out on tables inside this little area. And I kept telling my husband, go in there, see what are they doing in there, because I couldn't quite see everything.
Right.
Anyway, so the men are doing their thing and they're rocking and it's just so inspiring because they're so devout, so faithful. They truly want to be obedient. They believe there are hundreds of commandments and they try so hard to obey all of them. And how can you not admire that?
Exactly.
So we kind of spent a little time. I couldn't go in there, but I'm taking a million pictures because it just is so picturesque and inspiring. So then my twin sister and I walk over to the women's side, and the women don't really have a set outfit. They're, for the most part, wearing dresses, but not even all of them, but mostly modest clothing. And they have a shawl, but even not everybody had a shawl. But my twin sister and I made sure that we had a shawl so that we could be respectful. And so, have you seen the pictures of the letters, the notes that people put between the rocks?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
First time I ever saw that was when I was a young girl, and I was like, I want to do that. People are writing letters to God and putting them on the temple wall and in between the stone. I want to do that. And so we had our letters prepared. And before we put them in the cracks of the walls, we read our letters to each other and we cried. And it was just this bucket list item was to be able to do that. And I was so excited. And later I learned that there is a group of special rabbis who remove all of the letters every 6 months because otherwise
that would be overwhelming otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, and even when we were there were tons of them, but we found some little cracks and holes where we put our little letters. But anyway, these rabbis removed the letters to make room for more new letters for new visitors, and they buried them on the Mount of Olives. And so my letter is somewhere in the Mount of Olives, which is super cool.
Incredible. Yeah.
Because we know when Christ comes again, one of his
many stopping points.
He'll be on the Mount of Olives. He'll step his foot there and he might step on my letter. Who knows?
There you go.
Anyway, so that was amazing. That was such a big moment. And then we kind of sat back. They had some chairs and we just kind of wanted to observe. And it seemed in my mind's eye, I could see Relief Society sisters at the veil in our temple, standing at the wall, there to worship, there to find connection with God. And in a short time, a young woman came and we called her a beehive because she looked like she was 12 or 13 years old. And it must have been her first time because she was kind of looking around, also observing what the women were doing to see, if she was doing it right. Quote, right, And so she had scriptures in her hand and she was kind of looking around and she'd look down and she kind of started to rock a little bit because, that's kind of what happens there. And, you could tell she wasn't quite confident. And so then we were looking at other people and then we glanced back to kind of touch base with her. And pretty soon she was really getting into it. And finally, you could tell she stopped looking around. She was worshiping. She was doing her thing. She had the scriptures. She was tasting the scriptures and really communing with God there at the wall. And I was so tickled to watch her go through that evolution as she was learning how to really connect and relate to God. And I thought that was so neat. I'm having a weird hair moment now.
That's okay.
Anyway, then a short time later, another teenage girl, an older teenage girl came in. So I called her a Laurel. Do you remember back in the church?
Yeah, when we were,
Maya Maid. I always thought those were such random names. But anyway, she was older and she must have been there before because she was wearing a beautiful white dress, which again made me think of the temple. And she went straight to the wall. This little beehive, the younger girl, was not touching the wall. She was maybe 10 feet away from the wall having her moment. But this other teenage girl, she went straight on the wall, feet, body, hands, face, right on the wall. And she instantly started praying. She was talking, she was communing, she was worshiping, she was all in. And I loved that imagery, just boom, all in. Let's talk, God. Didn't even matter who, hundreds of people nearby. It was one-on-one with God. And I love that. And I thought, I want to be more like that. I want to have this, intimate relationship with God where it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. I'm all in. And I just think of her so often. I just loved that moment. And then after that, okay, and I'm giving you little tidbits because I'm going to tie this into another Hebrew word
Word.
that I want to
Yeah, I was like, I'm hoping there's a word coming.
So, we have our moment at the wall, and then more and more Jews are coming in, pouring into the wall. And I noticed there's a commotion beyond, or here's the wall. It's hard to describe this, but you can Google the images. But here's the wall, and then there's this massive concrete area, and where people are talking and hanging out and whatever. And so I saw this commotion, and so we finished at the wall, and we left the little curtained area kind of and walked out. And all of these teenage boys were just pouring in. They were from Hebrew schools, and they were so excited. They were fired up, and they had their arms around. They were this huge circle, and they're singing. They're lifting their buddies up on their shoulders. They're singing and dancing. And I'm like, that's how they worship on the Sabbath. That is kind of different how we members of the
A little
church,
more Southern Baptist there.
we're such a reverent church, aren't we?
Yes,
And
very
these
much.
guys, they were so excited to be at the wall and to be there and to celebrate and, and begin their Shabbat service. And I just was amazed and invigorated. It was so enthusiastic. And they opened up their arms and we joined in the circle and we're all, I didn't know what they were singing or saying, but they're there and they're welcoming in everybody. And it was so jubilant. And I thought, I want to feel like that on Sunday, our Sabbath day, and be excited. That alone was a lesson. It was so amazing. So, this word that I want to teach you and your listeners and your watchers is, Shema?
I do not know that word. It sounds familiar, but I don't know the meaning.
So, what it is it means to pray, to talk to God, to communicate, to commit, to obey, to take action, all of those things in one word. And actually, you could even pick apart the word and it means to witness, and which is super cool too. But so they have something called the Israel Shema prayer. And every Jewish boy and girl memorizes Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. And that's the prayer. And and you've heard this before, it starts with, "Hear, O Israel." And you even hear that or read that in the Book of Mormon as well. But hear, hearken, listen. And even the word hearken isn't just audible listening.
Right. No, it's an internal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's internally and even externally taking action. Don't just listen, but now take action.
Yeah.
And so it starts off that way. And then the bulk of it is to take God in worship and have faith with your heart, your soul, and your might. And so this whole wall experience was such a great illustration, I think, of these Jewish men at the wall who were trying to be so faithful, and with their heart, they're there, they're reading, they're studying, they're rocking, and they're tasting the scriptures. And then on the women's side, that young teenage girl with her soul, her whole physical body, she was all in. And then the young teenage Jewish boys with their might, they were just warriors for God, just so excited, Team God, and I just think that's so cool that they illustrated that with their actions. And have you ever seen the TV series The Chosen?
Oh, yes. I was just
Yes.
gonna say this is reminding me some of that right there.
Yes. So there are three occurrences so far as the series have evolved, or as the seasons have evolved, where we hear the Shema
Shema,
Israel prayer.
exactly.
And there's one scene that's so touching. It brings me to tears. That show brings me to tears in every
Every
episode. It's
episode, yep.
so good. But so this, and you'll remember this probably when Jesus is kind of camping outside and there's children out there.
My
And
favorite. Oh
do you
my
remember
god.
that?
Yes.
And,
Oh.
and and he says, "Oh, do you know the Shema prayer?" And they're
Mhm.
like, "Of course, because everybody does." Jews say it first thing when they wake up,
Mhm.
first thing before they go to bed, and when possible, the last thing they say before they die. And so they're like, "Of course." And he says, "Will you say it with me?" And so they're saying it and they're talking about him. He's the Jehovah of the Old
Right.
Testament. And I'm just like, and it's so touching. It's so sweet. So, I memorized it. And sometimes when I wake up, I'll try to say the whole thing. It doesn't take very long. I'll say it, I'll recite the scriptures. Or sometimes I'll say, Alexa, say Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through
So
9.
at least you're hearing it, right?
Right, right. So, yeah, right. And then if I'm really sleepy, sometimes I'll just say, Shema. And I know that God knows what I'm saying.
He understands. Yes.
He understands. And I just think it's such a neat concept that every Jew says that first thing when they wake up. How amazing would that be if all of us said, "Yay, God, team God, I'm here, I'm ready. I will obey. I will take action today." How different the world would be if he was the very first thing that we thought of when we woke up
And the last thing we thought
and
of.
the last thing, exactly. I mean, we say our prayers, morning and night, but it's that enthusiastic
Mhm.
approach to it. Have you ever been to a Jewish Passover dinner?
Not fully. We had when we were living in Pocatello, Idaho, we actually did a Shabbat dinner type thing for a Christmas thing because we had a brother who had been Jewish and joined the church.
Oh,
And so he taught us all what this was and the Passover, and we did a kind of night in Bethlehem with a Shabbat type dinner and stuff like that. And so, but listening to him describe it and stuff, and we've tried to do one with our family a couple of times where we've done a Shabbat dinner with everything with our children to teach them. But I would love one of these days I want to do, but we've tried to experience it. I know it's not full on, but we've tried
yeah,
to.
no, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the food items in the
Hmm.
Passover Seder, the
Hmm.
dinner, the very symbolic dinner,
Exactly.
they all are images of
Christ.
Christ.
Hmm.
It's amazing. And on a typical Shabbat, which is just their Sabbath
Hmm.
ceremony, it also points to Christ. For example, they have a cutting board. A neighbor just brought this over to me. Look at how cute
Oh,
this is. This little,
oh,
little
beautiful.
cutting board. And actually, it's Christmas, so it's got a little. And then she had a thing of cheese on it. And I'm like, that is the cutest thing. And so the board represents the cross that Jesus was crucified on, right?
They don't even
And
realize it. Yeah.
yeah, then the loaf of bread. So Jews eat challah bread,
Mhm,
which is kind of a braided, beautiful loaf.
mhm,
And so they have that on the board, the cutting board, the wooden board. And Jesus is the bread of life.
mhm.
He was born in Bethlehem, which means house of bread. I mean, sometimes I just laugh and I think, wow, God is giving us so many obvious clues.
It's literally not even symbolic at some points. It's just like, and here it is. Please just know that he is it. There you go.
Exactly, exactly. And then they have the linen that they put over the bread, which represents, what do you think that represents?
His tomb and the covering,
Yeah, the shroud, the linen that his
just like in the
body was wrapped
sacrament.
in
Yeah.
when he was placed in the tomb. Yeah, I mean, like, how obvious can that be? And so you see that as the classic Sabbath plate. And then there are two candles. And for many years, I've asked Jews, what's the deal with the candles? I mean, ye are the light of the world. I could think of a lot of things, but I thought, why two? I'm always trying to figure out symbols because I think they're so cool. And I never really got a good, satisfying answer. And so when I was writing this book, I was studying with a rabbi. And so finally, I'm like, okay, so what's the deal? Why two candles? And he's like, oh, because one is to learn the commandments and the will of God, and the other is to take action. And I'm like, love it. That totally makes sense. And so many Hebrew words I have found have a connotation of, learning about this thing, whatever the concept
And then
is,
doing it.
and then doing it. Exactly. I think that is so important that I forget who said this, somebody wiser than me said the aim of education is not to learn things, but to take action on what you've learned.
Mhm.
And that's kind of my mantra. I love learning, but to what end? If you're just going to learn stuff and consume, at some point it has to turn into action.
It has to be
Anyway,
something. And
so I love that.
or like teach it. Like what you were saying is like once you learn
Yeah.
it to teach it. I mean, because when we know something and it's so beautiful to us, what do we want to do? Teach it.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that Shabbat too with the candles. They also do that rocking, and when they're bringing in that light and that smoke into them as they're doing that and
Yes.
saying that prayer and that action as
Yeah.
well within that prayer with it, like they do at the Wailing Wall, and that action of the prayer and taking in those candles and that symbolism that way as well. And we even see it in The Chosen when he arrives home for Shabbat dinner with his mother. It's on the board. It's on the. I mean, it's all there as well, even
And
for
how
us to
must Christ have felt seeing those symbols, knowing they represented what he was going to do for us?
and I see that so much in The Chosen too. Jonathan Rumi does such a beautiful job of
Mhm.
his eyes, and you see that recognition of, it's the Christ, and he knows it's him, and you see him recognizing it in the pain or the beauty or
Yeah.
understanding. And here they are talking about, reading the scriptures, and he's like, yeah,
It brings me to tears to just even think about
to
it.
think
Okay.
about it, right? I
Ugh,
mean,
can't even talk about it.
his portrayal of Christ is interesting because, side note of this, my parents, the way we were raised with Christ was this humanized Christ and how personal he was to us. And so my brother, and so that second Nephi, my Jesus thing. And I loved Al Caraway's talk at the Cedar Fort thing where she was that
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing about my Jesus. It was so powerful to me. But that Jonathan Rumi and The Chosen have so well captured what I had felt the Savior to be. And I think that's why it's not it's not an LDS show, but so many LDS people recognize the Savior in that show because I think that's a lot of what we have always felt, this personal,
Yeah.
human, loving brother that is there with us. And I love that it's so much part of that. Anyway, there's my side note.
No, that's so well said and so beautiful. And so that brings me to my next shameless plug.
Excellent. The other book. Yes. Very good. Christ's Path to the
So this one came out last Easter. It's called can you see it? Via
Cross.
Dolorosa, Christ's Path to the Cross. And when Cedar Fort was the publisher of both of these books, when they first showed me the cover, this was all red, like
Oh,
blood.
mm,
And I was like, oh,
too
it is
much.
very accurate.
Yes.
But to Mormon sensitivity, it was a bit much. Like,
You're going to
did you
Catholic, brain. That would probably get you.
exactly? Did you ever see? Now, this was rated R, but it was
Yep.
the movie The Passion of the
Passion.
Christ.
I'm probably gonna watch it at some point here after Christmas, but yeah.
It is brutal and
Yeah.
probably very accurate. I mean, he
Yeah.
is the actor, Jim Caviezel. He's covered in blood.
Yeah.
And it's awful to watch, but probably pretty
Most accurate
realistic.
I've seen.
And I think somebody asked me this the other day. They said, why do you think people make a bigger deal out of Christmas than Easter? And I said, because everybody loves to celebrate the birth of a new baby. And it's the birth, it's the beginning. It's so exciting. It's the hope that Christ gives us, which is powerful. And we don't want to dwell on the icky, brutal last hours of Jesus's life, the violence, and gore and blood and heartache and,
Which is interesting because birth is just as brutal. Birth is just as gory in a lot of ways.
that's true.
And I mean, there's just as much.
Blood
They're
and
covered
gore.
in blood. They're covered. I mean, and there's
That's
so
true.
much of that similarity between the two. And his death is that birth of our resurrection, the birth of those things. There's so much symbolism between the two of those things as well. But you're right. We would rather that violence is a life versus this death that, and I think that's another thing that I love focusing on more as LDS Christian as well, is that yes, we see that cross and the power of that cross and the death and everything, but there's that hope of that rebirth afterwards in the empty tomb
Right.
and what comes from that, not just that's the end of it, but that hope afterwards of that resurrection.
Right.
So
I love that our previous prophet, President Nelson, really encouraged us as members of the church to spend more time and energy focusing on Easter because Christmas wouldn't even matter except for Easter,
and
right?
isn't that
That's
like a
the
Hinckley or a
power.
Benson quote that like without Easter there would be no Christmas?
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, I just saw that quote the other day and I was like, wow,
Yeah,
so that.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so I wrote this book to introduce something to members of the church that a lot of us don't know about, and that is the famous Via Dolorosa. So, Via Dolorosa is Latin, but it's also Spanish for the painful path or the sorrowing path. And it is an actual path in the old city of Jerusalem that takes Christ from condemnation, from Pontius Pilate's at his praetorium where he said, all right, we're going to crucify him,
There you go.
to crucifixion. So that path that he walked. Now, religious scholars, historians, archaeologists debate where these exact locations in Jerusalem are. There are, a few prominent sites that are the leading runner or the running I'm terrible with cliches today for some reason. But anyway, they're the big sites that people say are most likely the actual locations. And so over the centuries, well, actually, I should back up. After the resurrection and all of that, centuries later, Constantine became Christian, and his sweet mother wanted to go to Jerusalem and find the actual sites where things occurred in the New Testament and then be able to make a church on top of the site or some place where people could go and pilgrimage there and worship there. And I just think, what a sweetheart that she wanted to do that. And you mentioned the Shabbat, the ceremony that is done in the home. And it's also done by the woman, the mother in the home. And I think
Exactly.
that is so telling that she is setting that spiritual tone in her home every week. And there's a moment in that ceremony where she closes her eyes. And it is a moment where she is silently worshiping, even though she's surrounded by her family. That's her moment to not introduce religion, but to emphasize that relationship with God. And I just think that is so sweet. So back to Constantine's mother, she went to Jerusalem and after doing as much research as she could at the time, and we're talking, you know, almost 2,000 years ago,
Say, yeah.
back in the 300s, 300 AD or something. So she found these particular sites, and there were oftentimes pagan sites built, on the same site, but to pagan gods. And so she would have things torn down and then build things. And then over the centuries, other things, the Crusaders would come or other people would knock things down. Muslims would take over, I mean, Jerusalem is just
Has been through a
layers
lot.
and
Yeah.
layers of these things. But anyway, so today there's a path of 14 stops, or what they call stations,
Hmm.
where you can go and take, start at the beginning and then follow this pathway as it winds through the city to what Constantine's mother thinks is the site of the crucifixion. And it's so touching to go there and experience that, because there are Christians from around the world speaking all the languages, worshiping in all their unique ways, but they're all trying to think of Christ and thank Christ for what he did. You
Hmm.
see large tourist groups carrying these big crosses to commemorate this walk through the city. You see, Christian groups singing hymns, reading scriptures, having a priest or a pastor or a preacher explaining what happened at that location. You see monks doing a procession. In fact, they do that every day. And we just happened to be along that path when the monks came and they're chanting. And I'm just loving all of it.
Absolutely.
This is
Yeah.
the coolest thing ever. And it's so fun. And so to help you identify, they have markers on the walls or statues, signage, of course, so that you can make the right turns, the correct turns and whatnot.
Right.
And then they have some kind of something at most of the stations, oftentimes a church or a chapel or a little room, or at the very least, there are a few where it's just a marker. For example, there's this one scripture where it talks about how Jesus was exhausted carrying the cross, bloodied, after being tortured and beaten all night long. And he leans his hand up against the wall, and there's this groove in the wall where pilgrims have come for centuries to touch that spot. And, was it that exact spot? I don't know.
Is it?
We've got
No.
experts that debate all of this, but it almost doesn't matter if it's the exact spot, because as you're going through this pathway, you're reading the scriptures, you're thinking about the things where he tripped and fell, or where he met his mother, or where he talked to the women of Israel and gave, a little message to them, and, all of the things. And as I'm experiencing this, I'm thinking, why don't we members of the church know about this more? We should all be flocking to Israel and doing this little path. Today, it's really more organized and maintained by the Roman Catholic Church. So in Jerusalem today, it's divided into 4 quarters, the old city inside the walls. And so there's the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter. And I was like, that's so random. How did the Armenians get their own quarter, this precious city? But they're the first country that officially declared themselves Christian. But anyway, and the path winds through the various areas.
Yeah.
And what was I going to say about that? I can't even remember now.
Why we choose
Oh,
members.
it was, yeah. So it's maintained generally by the Roman Catholic Church. A lot of the little chapels are constructed and maintained by the Roman Catholic Church, although the Armenians have some stuff there as well. Christians do have some things there as well. But at one point, a lot of the Christians who were flocking said, wait a second, not all of these stations are actually Bible-based. There are a few that are kind of handed down by tradition and legend. And did they really occur? For example, one of the stations is named after Veronica. And the story goes that Jesus was carrying the cross and bloodied, and a young woman wanted to help him and gave him a little handkerchief for him to wipe his face. And so he did, and then he went along his way. And later, when she looked at the cloth, it had the image of Christ on the actual fabric. And the tradition is, where is that fabric now? It's supposedly, it has been passed to different churches over the centuries. And, now it's in the Vatican in a special secret place. It doesn't really exist. Did that really happen? I don't know. But people say, was her name really Veronica? And some people say, well, if you look at the Latin name, what it is saying is like veracity, truth, virtue. So is it just a symbol of this innocent man who was truth, right? And virtue, on his way to the cross? I don't know, but it's a lovely thought to
Yeah.
think about one of the many characteristics, or two of the characteristics of Jesus Christ. And so in this little book, of course, I walk you through it. It could literally be a tour guide map. It tells you turn left here, turn right there, notice this thing.
So when
But
we go to Israel, take that with me.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
But if you can't get to Israel, and it may be that we have run out of the peaceful days in Israel, it's only going to get worse
Right.
based on scriptures
Scripture.
and
Exactly.
my understanding of the second coming and everything leading up to it. You can take it as a family, and leading up to it, if you want to hit the 14 stations, you can begin celebrating Easter 2 weeks, and each day look at one of the stations, read the scriptures, read the stories, read the information about that station. What's there now? How can we incorporate those lessons or ideas into our life? There's ideas or little activity ideas for families, scriptures, quotes from leaders of the church for each of those stations. And the last station is this massive church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where several things happened. He was right outside the church where he was beaten again with, the stripes that were on his back that you can see in the matzah bread at Passover. It literally has stripes. Those stripes are supposed to remind Jews of when they had to flee Egypt and they didn't have time to have their bread rise. So the bread is flat. And some people say they probably had a grill, which left those marks. But again, those marks were supposed to teach the Jews what to look for to recognize that Messiah and what he would go through. And inside that church, he is nailed to the cross, and there's beautiful artwork. He's obviously put on the cross, crucified. Now, obviously, that church would have been outside the gates at the time. Now it's inside the gates. And some people think that really is where he was crucified. And then you go downstairs, and then they have where he would have been anointed with oils and dressed. And then inside that church, they believe that's the actual tomb where he would have been laid. And that's the last station, is the tomb. And I often thought, there's got to be a 15th station where you celebrate that.
The upper room where he reappeared or something, right?
No, that's not the end of the story.
No,
The whole
it's not.
story matters because he was resurrected. Now, of course, there's a whole other area inside the walls in Jerusalem, Golgotha, where they believe that was the crucifixion spot. And then right next to it, the garden tomb area, as you walk around through the gardens. And I can't tell you which one is correct. I felt the spirit in all of those places. And this last location, this massive church, is really different than, again, for what Mormon sensitivities are. We are used to beautiful, bright, white temples, right? And I've heard so many members of the church say, oh, I can't feel the spirit when I'm at a Catholic cathedral. I'm like, are you kidding, with the flying buttresses and those Gothic windows that point to heaven? You can't feel the spirit? And they're dark, there's candles, there's often incense, and all of that is in this big church of the Holy Sepulchre as well. And so it's different for us, but I absolutely felt the spirit. You've heard people talk about, oh, I didn't get anything out of going to church today. Well, it was there if you.
It's the choices we
wanted
make
it.
to what we want to get out of it. Yeah. And I think that's with any place you go, any church, any not church. I mean, in nature, you get out of it, what you want with God and what you bring. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, I loved working on both of these books. I cried my way through both of these books. I think that they're really special. Of course, what author isn't going to say that?
There are babies. I know.
But I'm so excited to teach the 2026 Old Testament because everything points to Christ. And
I
I
think
want
I'm
our,
coming to your Sunday school lessons. I'm just saying.
yeah, it turns
Although
out we live so close to each other. You could.
I know, like down the road. Here we go.
That would be fun to give you a hug in person.
Oh, we are
I'll
going
be
to definitely make.
teaching the first Sunday of every month. So my next lesson is the first Sunday in January. And here I happen to even have this sitting here right by my desk. This is, of course, you can get this online, but this is the church's Come Follow Me 2026. Can you see that? It's kind of blurry here. But
Yep.
this is Christ. Well, you might say, is that Christ or is it Moses or is it King David? I don't know.
Well,
But
they're all symbols of the same person there. So I'm just
exactly.
saying.
You're right.
Yes. Yes.
So the very first lesson is an overview of the Old Testament, challenging members to look for Christ in the Old Testament because it all points to him. And so it's going to be like a scavenger hunt. In fact, I don't have one in front of me right now, but I bought these little miniature Jesus kind of toy things. I'm going to hide some underneath the chairs and, and say, this is a year of a scavenger hunt where we're going to be looking for Christ in everything because he's
Well, and he
there.
even tried to tell them in the New Testament. He would quote Isaiah, he would quote David, he would quote all of them.
That's right.
To say, I was there. I was in all of this. And he made those links so clear. I don't know how people don't see that, but that's, I guess so.
Well, okay, so I'm going to share, I don't know how long we've been talking, but I'll share one thing that you're going to think is cool because we both love this kind of stuff. So the very first sentence in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, what does it say?
In the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right?
Yep.
So if you look at the Hebrew words, and again, reading them from right to left and picking them apart, let's see, I'm going to look at these. Hold on, my notes. I have to expand it. So, okay. Anyway, so the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. And then the last is Tav. Aleph and Tav represent the beginning and the end, right? Which is also what we call Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. That's the Greek version, right? Which is, that alone reminds us that Jesus Christ is there from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it represents completion, truth, covenant. The Old Testament is just brimming full with covenant. And I love too that President Nelson really tried to help us understand, we have covenants, we make covenants in the temple, but that's different than being a covenant person. And God tried to teach the Jews how to be a covenant people, right? And they are a covenant people, and they are so obedient, and I'm so impressed with them. So let's see, I'm kind of going backwards in my notes here. Before Hebrew was a written language, they used Paleo Hebrew pictographs, which is kind of almost like Egyptian hieroglyphics. And you'll like this because you speak sign language. And so if you pick apart these pictures, Aleph, which is that first letter of the alphabet, its image is an ox. So what does this mean in sign language? I guess if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see what I'm doing. I pretend like I'm looking at an ox with horns.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yep.
Tell everybody, what does that mean?
Government, royalty, all of that comes from
that. Strength, power, leader.
Exactly.
Yeah, power. Is that a characteristic of Christ, the King? Yes.
The very first, yeah.
Tav, that last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, its symbol in this ancient pictograph is a cross,
No way.
which is a sign, a covenant, a mark. Does that make you think of Jesus
Oh my
Christ?
gosh.
Isn't that amazing?
The
But
king on the
wait,
cross.
there's more.
Oh
So
gosh.
then, if you then dissect the Hebrew words, it kind of says, in the beginning, Alpha and Omega, Jesus Christ, God. Now, the Hebrew word that's used is Elohim. And as members of the church, we know that means God the Father.
Father,
But
right.
him, when you see a word, not always, but sometimes when you see him or I am, it's plural. So it's saying
Godhead
God's plural.
or
Now,
council.
some people will interpret that to mean Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother as a unit, God's.
Both. Yeah.
Or some people say it was the council of the gods. Either way, a plurality of gods, could be God the Father and his son, Jesus Christ, created the heavens and the earth, okay? Which is great. But there's also other things, if you, again, pull apart, Hebrew words are symbols kind of put together, kind of almost like Mandarin.
I was gonna say kanji and stuff.
Yeah, and I've been trying to learn Mandarin when I was traveling to China doing a bunch of business stuff, and I'm horrible at it. I can have a conversation verbally, but the little chicken scratch, kanji, that is so hard for me. But anyway, they're built. You're adding symbols, the lines and things, and you pull it together. Yeah. So same thing with Hebrew. When you look at those things, this is so poetic. If you look at the words and pick it apart, I'm not explaining this very well, but you could translate it to say the strong leader, right? The horn, the strong leader who is marked by the cross, the first and the last, the powerful one who made the covenant through the cross. All of that is embedded in that verse of Genesis. Like what? Jesus is right there in the very first sentence.
Well, the beginning, the word was with God and word was God. I mean, that's in the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool.
I'm excited to read the Bible again this year now. I'm just like,
right? But sometimes we just sort of tolerate the Old Testament year and try to get through it. But now, if people can really look for Christ and catch those little Hebrew lessons that are embedded in those words, it's going to be fun. By the way, did you hear that the prophet in the first presidency just released a statement saying, whatever Bible you want,
I know, right?
Go for it.
As long as, and to me, that is a hard thing because they do change, the words do change meaning sometimes, but they give the gist. And I understand, different levels and people understanding it at different levels. But even the King James Version, the words aren't always right when we look at the Hebrew words, like you say, and you go back to the original words, the difference that makes in what it means and what it symbolizes and what we understand. So I love the fact that I'm like, oh, so I'm not bad going back to the Hebrew anymore, right? I'm not like going back to those original texts or those apocryphals that we now understand. To really understand those texts, I think that's a great thing. Is to understand it however we can is important.
Ultimately, I mean, I like the minutia of words and language like you do, right?
But not everyone
I
does.
think it's fun. Because I love symbols. I love diving down into layers. But ultimately, if that doesn't do it for you and you want to read the
anything that
New International Version, because that's what resonates with you, then do it. So I love that. I attended, now that I live in Utah, I got to go to BYU Education Week. Do you ever go to that?
It's always when I'm teaching. So it's like, Education Week would be lovely for people who are educators.
It's so awesome. I mean, I've been going for years, but I couldn't always go every year because I lived out of state. And so this year I'm like, anyway, I attended some Hebrew stuff, some Jewish stuff, and some Old Testament stuff, some apocryphal stuff. I went to a class on the King James Version and how that came to be, and all of the other versions of the Bible as they were translated in English. And they were very political,
very
mostly translated in England depending on which was the ruling power, Protestant or Catholic, and I think that adds some important insight depending on which version of the Bible you want to read. Some are like almost entirely propaganda translations, which I think is so interesting and hilarious and entertaining sometimes too.
Right?
Anyway, yeah. So,
I
but yeah, the bottom line is just read the doggone Bible and start tasting it and communing and learning as much as you can and looking for Christ. That's the bottom line.
and I
Look for
think any
Christ.
way you can look for Christ and find him,
Yeah.
best thing we can do, right?
What's your calling, by the way?
I am ward organist and a genealogist consultant.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's fun days.
Ward organist is a calling I'm pretty sure I'll never have since I can't play the organ. But
Yeah.
I would learn if they called me to do that.
I'm not great at it. The piano's awesome. And I taught myself the organ and did, but I can't do the feet anymore because my Parkinson's and stuff I just can't do. But there's a lovely feature on the organ that's called, bass, and and you can push buttons and you can play it and nobody knows the difference. Now everyone will know my secret. But nobody cares if you can play the feet or not, as long as you can play and you're willing to play in any word anymore. It's like, oh, you play the piano, you can play the organ. And I'm like, not really, but okay. So, there's tricks.
Oh,
You just make it work. But
secrets of an organist. And then are you a family history consultant or that?
yeah, consultant. So the family, yeah, whoever needs help in the ward calls me. I get
Yes,
really passionate every once in a while and I'll go out and do my thing and people get excited for a little while and then it goes down. And you're just like,
I know.
do it ever
I
again. But yeah,
I think because it doesn't feel urgent, we feel like we got the whole millennium to work on that. And yet, I was thinking about this just the other day. The prophets, of course, all of them have encouraged us to go to the temple, but President Nelson kept saying, get to the temple. And it made me think in these last days, it's going to get ugly. And I'm wondering if he's trying to help us get that work done for our ancestors so they could be released to help us and protect us and
yeah.
guide us through some of this crazy stuff that's coming down the pike. You
We're going
know
to need
what
the
I mean?
power on all
I
sides,
mean,
I
that's
think.
not doctrine necessarily, but that was the impression that I had the other day. And I was like, I need all the help I can get. Yeah, I got to recruit some angels by getting their temple work done.
The other
Because
thing
it's
that I
tough.
love about Genealogy and that I like my big thing is as a writer and things like this, I'm all about stories and
Yeah.
finding the stories and connecting to them as humans as well. And just trying to, and sharing our own stories because so many people don't write journals anymore. So many people don't record our stories anymore. They just are on Facebook, they're on social media. It's all recorded there, right? Like, but that's not the experiences, and that's not who you were, and that's not. And I'm like, so my one of my biggest things and soapboxes that I get on is, you've got to write your stories. You've got to share these experiences for who knows who, but someone at some point is going to need those. And when I'm researching names, I'm not just looking at names. I'm like, what stories are out there? What are the things that they can tell me about who they were and connect with them as a person and make them real to me, just like the Savior in the scriptures, looking for him and making him human. I need to do that with my ancestors as
I
well. And
love that.
so
That's such a great point because I think sometimes we think we're not doing genealogy unless we're on our computer or we're researching.
it is
But
so
writing your
much more.
story, that is genealogy.
You can do your genealogy every day just by even if you're recording it. If you don't write, great, awesome. Get on your phone, make a recording. I mean, the
Yeah.
family history apps are so incredible that they've got the recording option, they've got the video options, they've got so many things and prompts. Even if you don't know what to write about, they've got prompts there now. You like go in, pick a prompt,
Yeah.
tell a story about a thing, and it leaves something for someone. And even if it's for yourself or for the future, but someone needs it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. One of the very first books that I wrote was with my twin sister about genealogy, how to do your genealogy. When we first wrote the book, it was published by another traditional publishing house, and it was called Climbing Family Trees Whispers Through the Leaves.
Mm,
And it's a really neat how-to book, but
mm,
we really wanted it to be filled with stories
mm.
because that's what brings it all to life. And so we put a call out to genealogists around the world and got all these amazing stories where people have these serendipitous experiences and
Mhm.
they know that somebody, an ancestor from the other side of the veil, was whispering and telling them, go look there, do this, I need you to find this person or whatever. Years later, the book is still for sale on Amazon, but we changed the name because back in the day, if you could write a title and have the name be super creative and clever, that was awesome. But
Now I
now
just want it straightforward.
it's all about keywords, and
Yeah.
people are not going to search for whispers in the leaves and expecting a genealogy book. So we changed the name to Ancestry. Everybody knows that word. And so
Right.
you can still find that, but it's like all of my books, again, because of my didactic personality, I give you information and then I give you an assignment. So every assignment has homework. It's just like in these other books. What can you do with
Do
this
with it.
information? And so, yeah, so it has little assignments, it has stories, and then it has, strategies. When you hit a brick wall, what do you do? But genealogy is so much easier nowadays with everything on the internet. You could do it at home in your pajamas,
On your phone with your thumbs. It's yep.
Yeah. But
Hmm.
there's also some chapters in the book where, like you said, sharing stories, writing your own story, all the creative things you can do to honor your heritage
Hmm.
with your kids, how to get kids involved and interested. Because genealogy isn't just sitting at your computer. They have living, you need to go to Europe. Europe is filled with what are called living museums,
Hmm.
which are really similar to Nauvoo. Have you ever been to
Hmm.
Nauvoo?
Yes, love that.
Yeah, yeah, where you see the buildings and you go to the blacksmith shop and you get to, get a little black, I forget what we got there, like some little thing that they made for us, a nail. I think they bent the nail and turned
A
it
ring
into
or
a
something.
ring. Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you get to make a candle in the candle shop. Anyway, they have those all over Europe. If you have European ancestry, which a large percentage of American members of the church come from Europe, obviously. And anyway, and they're so fun. And like, you can call that genealogy, but you're on vacation and you're checking out all this really cool stuff. I
Right.
highly recommend those. They're really well done and a lot of fun.
That's incredible. I love it. I love you. We're gonna be best friends. It's gonna be great. Oh my gosh. I don't even know where the time has gone. This has been, wow, incredible. And it's so exciting. Everyone, go out, get this book, make it your companion guide as you go through the Old Testament this year with your Come Follow Me manual and learn languages. Check out our other books, which are all great as well. And look for more episodes. I think we're going to have some more things going on. She and I are going to connect here. So,
Yeah.
um,
I'll tell you about one other quick
okay.
story, because you like stories.
Yes.
I have four sons and I wanted to write a book with each one of my sons. So far I've written one with my oldest son and I'm currently writing another one with my youngest son, which that one will come out next year. But with my oldest son, he was dating and just in the dating mode. He had just
Uh-huh.
graduated from BYU and my brother, who's not a member of the church, said, how's the dating world outside of Provo, Utah? Because he went to BYU. And he's like, oh, it's different. It's a little tricky. And so my brother said, well, do you ever use like Tinder? And my son was like, yeah, no, Tinder's not the vibe that I'm going for. And so they were on a hike in Guatemala. So they're sitting on the top of the mountain. And one of them says, what if what would it look like if Tinder got baptized? And so my son invented the Mutual app, the
Oh,
LDS
he's the
dating
one
app
over that.
Mutual. Yeah, that's
Crazy.
that's my son's company. And so my brother, who is a very wealthy attorney at Facebook, he was his angel investor, and that's how Mutual came to be.
There you go,
Fun
guys.
fact,
If you're single, mutual.
Mutual.
I
Yep.
would not survive the dating world in today's day and age.
You never know where a book can go.
You never know what life can bring for you guys.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Where can we find you? Where can we find your books and follow you?
I'm everywhere. So you can find a lot of my books still in bookstores. Some of them are LDS, so you can find them in LDS bookstores, and then some of my books are mainstream. You can certainly find them all on Amazon still. and my website, which is just my name, Trina Boice. You can find me as Trina Boice, but also as Movie Review Mom on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, all of Facebook, all of the groups, the pages, the reels, all that kind of stuff.
I love it. Fun fact, I've also taught film literature. So
Yeah.
you guys, she and I are just our kindred spirits meeting each other on Earth again for the first time. And
And now we're
best
neighbors
buddies.
too.
We're just reuniting on the side of the veil.
Yeah.
So this is exciting. Hey, you guys,
Thank you
check
so
them out.
much.
And we're so excited. Thank you so much. And check us out next time on Roundies, Rants, Raves, and Reviews. Thank you guys. Know your loved.
Bye.